Hey, how's it going? So, this shouldn't be too weird.
Culture, what culture, what culture, what
Hey, look at it over there.
culture, what culture, what.
I don't know what that was. Hi, hope you're ready to say what again?
Say what again?
As we get ready to dive into Quentin Tarantino's masterwork, Pulp Fiction. Where do we even begin? What can we say about Pulp Fiction or Quentin Tarantino? What in the world does it have to do with Scrooge or the Apostle Paul? And what, if anything, can it teach us about ourselves?
Say what again?
Clearly, Quentin Tarantino has become a major force in the motion picture industry, but it was the epic Pulp Fiction that broke him into the mainstream of popular consciousness, following a long string of earlier critically acclaimed writing and directing credits. Pulp Fiction exists within a universe of iconic characters, parlance, and structure, which at times obscure, intentionally I might add, the central plot line of the film. And it's that central plot line that we'll look at today. Now, I said before that Pulp Fiction shares common ground with Ebenezer Scrooge and St. Paul. Well, how, you might ask? Well, I'll tell you, it's redemption. They're all redemption stories. A Christmas Carol has been made into film more often than any other story. And why? Well, because it's a redemption story, and we want to believe in redemption. Not just for regular people like you and me, but redemption for the very worst among us. Old Scrooge was a bad guy, and Dickens works hard to drive that point home, showing us what a hard, cold, tight-fisted old man he is. But then, a supernatural intervention occurs in the form of visiting ghosts, and those ghosts show Scrooge the error of his ways, and he awakens reborn, a new, kind, generous, and loving person. Hooray! Redemption is one of the central themes of the Bible, but specifically, we can see a very similar arc in the story of the conversion of Paul. Now, Paul, who was originally known as Saul, hated early Christians, and he openly persecuted and imprisoned them. Then one day, Jesus, who had already been crucified, shows up, and he knocks Saul off his ass. Then Jesus drops some knowledge on Saul, and after a brief period of blindness, Saul emerges a brand new person, and the biggest advocate for Christianity ever in the history of Christianity. Another complete turnaround. It even changes his name from Saul to Paul. Hooray! So what about Pulp Fiction? I give you
Jules Winfield, our man in Inglewood.
In all three cases, whether we're talking about Scrooge or Paul or Jules, a really bad guy turns into a really good guy. But how? Divine intervention? Well, certainly. But what happens internally is a massive shift of perspective. That change of perspective informs and precedes the change of heart. And perspective is one of the most valuable things you can have. In Act 1, we learn that Jules is a hard, cold character, just like Scrooge. There's a little bit of good-natured banter between him and Vincent in the car, but when it's time to get into character, Jules is a cold-blooded killer. In fact, that's how Chapter 1 ends, with the image of Jules and Vincent as cold-blooded killers. Nothing good or redeeming to speak of. Then, it's off we go through what is probably the lengthiest and most iconic chapter of the film, as Vincent takes Mia Wallace out on a date. And oh, what hijinks ensue! Now this is just a detour, but isn't it interesting how Tarantino obscures the main plotline of the film by shifting perspective? In the first chapter, Jules and Vincent are the main characters, while in the second chapter, Vincent and Mia Wallace become the main characters. Act 3 changes perspective yet again, and now Butch the Boxer, who we met briefly at the beginning of Chapter 2, is the main character. We travel along through Butch's ordeal, and we see Vincent and Mia meet again briefly, although Jules is nowhere to be seen. Then, it's Butch after the fight, and going after the watch, and killing Vincent. We travel through the entire pawn shop sequence, which leads to Butch and Fabienne escaping on Zed's chopper. And the end. Well, almost. That's the end of the story, but it's not the end of the film. Tarantino shifts perspective again, and chronology. He moved chapter 2 to the end of the movie, so now we'll have to travel backwards in time, back to that apartment where they speak what?
Say what again?
And it's here that the miracle happens, when a guy jumps out and empties his gun at Jules and Vincent point blank. But he manages to miss with every shot. Now Jules is clearly upset and uneasy with what has happened, even in the immediacy of the moment. Jules, just like Scrooge looking at his own grave, has been faced with his own mortality, and that can shake you up. Vincent, however, is unmoved. All through the Marvin incident and the Bonnie situation, Jules tries to return to the topic, but Vincent continues to blow him off. It's only afterwards at the diner that we find out what the story really is. Jules admits it may only be his perception, but he takes being missed by every shot at point-blank range as a miracle. He believes that God got involved. He discusses quitting his dirty work and retiring to a nomadic, monastic lifestyle like Kung Fu. Something got his attention and it changed his perspective. Vincent leaves for the restroom, frustrated with Jules' new perspective. Finally, the film comes full circle. The opening scene of the outlaw couple plotting to stick up the diner comes back around. And it's in his interaction with the outlaw husband that Jules explains just how his perspective has shifted. He begins to exegete his understanding of his signature Bible verse and how his perspective has changed in regard to it. It's an amazing moment when a character actually explains their own catharsis. Then he tries to help. Jules gives them his own money as well as everything else they've stolen, but not the briefcase. And he says, "I'm buying something with this money." Now lots of people will tell you that they have changed, but until they show you, you don't know if it's real. But just like when Paul stopped persecuting Christians, and when Ebenezer Scrooge bought that giant turkey, Jules Winfield proves he has changed. He buys a man's life so he won't have to kill him. It appears he has retired because we never see him again after he leaves the diner. Now we don't know whatever became of Jules Winfield. We only know that he wasn't there when Butch caught Vincent with his pants down and ended his life. We have to assume that Jules is out there somewhere in the Tarantino universe roaming the highways and byways, and maybe someday we'll see him again. At least we hope so. We love redemption stories so much that many of them have become part of our annual holiday traditions. We talked about Scrooge, but just think about the Grinch or old George Bailey. Folks who were down at the dark end of the barrel until a light came on and they got a new perspective. And that new perspective changed not only how they saw themselves, but it also changed how they saw others and acted towards them. We love redemption stories because we want and need them to be true. But why? Well, because we know how fallible, how lacking we are as human beings. And if we can believe in redemption for the very worst among us, it's easier to believe that redemption is possible for us. You know, we'd love to have you drop a comment below. What are some of your favorite redemption stories? Maybe some we didn't cover. What Tarantino films do you love? And what do you think was in that briefcase?
Say what again?